everybody, Backyard Bullion here. Will we ever see a return to the gold standard? And if we did, what would be the implications on the price of gold, the gold that we hold within our personal stacks, and the economies involved in that return to a gold standard all around the world? It's a fascinating topic and one which I have no doubt will split opinion out there within the community, which makes it a perfect video for this week's Ponderous Wednesday discussion. It's important to remember before we continue with this video though that I am not a financial advisor, I am not an economist, I'm just a guy who likes to talk about shiny things here on YouTube, and I'm just sharing my thoughts and opinions on this subject. So any financial decisions that you make having watched today's video are yours and yours alone. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions though as we go throughout today's video. It's a fascinating one, as I say, it will split opinion. All I ask is that you comment respectfully of my and other people's opinions. So I'll see you down in the comment section for a fun and healthy debate on the subject of the gold standard and whether or not a return to a gold standard is likely, and if it happened, what would be the implications? So for those who don't know, let's start at the beginning. What is the gold standard? Quick summary, the gold standard is a monetary system that was adopted in the 1800s to basically restrict the amount of currency that was out there within a particular government's country. So governments would have gold in their vaults and their currencies would be index linked to that gold. So there would only be a certain amount of currency available for people to use within society based on how much gold and silver those governments held. And that had a whole bunch of really positive benefits for global trade. You know, countries would only be able to buy and sell things to other countries based on how much money they actually had and how much gold those countries held between each other. Also, it would restrict the potential for hyperinflation and deflation of various currencies because they would always be index linked to a physical commodity that those countries would hold. However, the gold standard was not perfect and it had its negatives. It was a very inefficient way to help stimulate growth within a country. And as the world evolved and changed over the last 100 years into the 1900s and the various world wars that happened, it was very quickly realized that having an index-linked currency to gold and gold prices was very restrictive for different countries around the world. And in fact, during the world wars, the gold standards were abolished for that short time. And then after the world wars, various different systems were adopted or modified essentially. And then we saw the final demise of the gold standard in the 1970s when the US finally dropped it as the main backer to the US dollar. And the US dollar has essentially changed to that kind of gold standard. It's a fiat standard, one might say. So now in the world, countries around the world use fiat currencies, which is essentially a made-up number that people will believe has buying power. And we go to the shops, we buy our groceries, we pay our rent with these fiat numbers, and governments can add new numbers, banks can add new numbers, banks and institutions can print money when needed to stimulate the economy or to pay for things. And that does have negatives, don't get me wrong, you know, we see huge debts out there in the world, but it has allowed the world to evolve and change. And you know, we've got nearly 7.5 billion people in this world now, significantly different to the billion people at the turn of the century or in the 1900s or 1800s. I can't remember the exact world populations, but the point is that the world has changed significantly. The amount of money that's required to be in circulation for all those people in the world to even function is different, and the world has changed, which is partially why I do not see a return to the gold standard being something that is likely to happen. The world has changed far too much. The economies of the world are far too different to what they were when the gold standard was around. And by changing back to the gold standard, you will restrict and damage the economies around the world. So that's a little bit of the history of the gold standard. Now, it's recently come back into the limelight over this last couple of years because Donald Trump is a big advocate and fan of gold and the return potentially to the gold standard. Now, whether that's going to get any traction or not, I really doubt it. I personally cannot see any situation by which that will pass through government in the US or even in the UK. It's not really something that's on the UK's roadmap at the moment. We're a little bit distracted with something called Brexit, but you know, also combined with the fact that the UK has basically sold off all of its gold reserves a couple of years ago. So the chances of The UK returning to a gold standard is next to nothing. And the chances of the US returning to the gold standard, I also think, are pretty slim too. Now, for the gold standard to really, really work, and this is one of the major benefits of the gold standard when it was around, all the different countries that had the gold standard were able to trade with each other very easily and reliably. You knew that the physical asset that you were paying for something with, people would literally transport gold all around the world. That's one of the reasons why, if you saw on my channel the other week, we had a giant shipwrecked silver bar that we created, and that was made from shipwrecked silver that was being shipped around the world as part of World War II's monetary systems, and being able to use that silver for coinage and things like that. So it's fascinating, really, to think that, big loads of gold and silver were transported all around the world. But it was easy. It was that kind of global standard of cash and currency and being able to pay for things for people, which is really, really, important in this world. But that has changed significantly now, and we have essentially promissory notes and, debt ceilings. And if there was a situation where the US returned to the gold standard, if they just turned around and said tomorrow, we are going to turn to the gold standard, that is going to have some very significant implications on A, the price of gold, and B, other economies around the world which hold the US debt. And a lot of people don't necessarily understand that. For the US to adopt the gold standard, now I am going to focus a lot on the US here because it's the country that is A, most likely, even though that likelihood is very low, and B, it will have the largest effect on that global economy. If the US returned to the gold standard tomorrow, they would A, have to peg the price of gold to some inordinate amount to cover how much currency that's out there. And I'm not even sure that everybody really truly knows how many dollars are actually out there in the world. So it would essentially be a financial style collapse. It would be an admission that the dollar has completely failed. It would be essentially a new dollar. So it would be, rather than the dollar that we know today, it would be a brand new dollar backed by gold. Some experts out there have said that it would have to be $10,000 an ounce for gold. I personally don't think that's even enough. We see how much debt's out there on things like the US debt clock and things like that, and you don't really know if that's true. I personally think that there's even more debt than is being declared out there. And, that there are obviously benefits, that it would curtail spending, it would bring that deficit down. It would essentially mean that everything goes back onto an even keel, an even par. But as we'll come on to in a moment, there are going to be some significant restrictions and negative aspects to that. But the major point that I'm trying to address here is that there is just not enough gold. There is not enough gold to cover the numbers, the stupid numbers, the trillions, the amount of zeros behind some of these debt numbers. And if the US was to return to that gold standard, and someone like China was to call in that debt, they would be like, look, we've got all of these dollars, we want the gold, please. And it's not an unheard of thing to think that might happen, because you've seen how much gold China and the likes of Russia and various countries around the world are buying. It's not an unlikely scenario that suddenly you could see a calling in of all of the debts that are out there, and that would just completely destroy the US economy. It really would. And for people to advocate that, it's just with the benefits of being, keeping spending in check and having an inflation-free currency, or a very low rate of inflation and devaluation of the currency, the risk of that is just, in my opinion, it's unfathomable. I just can't understand why some people would think that that's a good idea. But at the same time, there are a fair few people out there who do think that is a good idea. And there's some very people in high places that think that as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting side of things from that point of view. But there is a reason why the gold standard failed in the first place, and it's not to be ignored that it really does restrict the ability of a country and government to grow. If there's a situation by which you restrict the amount of money that's in an economy, essentially what that means is you're asking all of your citizens out there to basically vie for a piece of the pie. And one institution that wants the largest piece of the pie is, of course, going to be the government, and that is going to be probably one of the biggest implications that I can see for stackers out there. Now, a lot of the advocates of a return to the gold standard will see this as an opportunity to have an awful amount of gold in their vaults, in their stacks, and you see big, institutions out there, JP Morgan buying stupid amounts of silver for a potential windfall. If that was to happen, Don't really see it happening, but if it did, if gold suddenly went to $10,000 an ounce because the US has adopted the gold standard, I think that is going to have implications for personal ownership of gold. And that's one thing in history that is really hard to ignore. In the 1930s, it was made illegal to own gold in various countries around the world, including the UK and the US. And you had to have a license to hold gold. And it was very heavily regulated. And it was only back in the 1970s when it was made legal again for individuals to purchase gold. And since then, we've had, 40, 50 years almost now of people buying gold. So there is an inordinate amount of gold within the community, within just the general citizenship of various countries around the world. And if you add all of that up, it's a significant amount. And who knows, you could just get a situation by which the US government might say, we've gone back to the gold standard, but China's called in their debt, so we need all the gold out there. So they then, what do? Do they buy back your gold? With what? They've index linked their currency to gold, so they have to essentially use gold to buy gold. So they're not going to do that. They're going to potentially confiscate the gold. Now that is, that's a potentially very volatile situation, and it's an unlikely one in the first place because I don't think the gold standard will ever come back. But it's something to factor in. So all of you stackers out there that are, advocating a return to the gold standard and thinking that you'll become kings within your community because you hold a certain amount of gold and silver, be aware that might not happen. That might be the converse opposite of what might happen. It might be that you lose all of your stack. Yes, you might get some money in return, but then you're back to that sort of fiat currency almost. The gold standard is, by all means, an outdated monetary system of a bygone era. The ultimate point I'm trying to make here is that the world has changed significantly since the time of gold standards. And you see that people out there have a different outlook and way of thinking about gold, about commodities, about precious metals. And it's now, the world continues revolving, I think, no matter what happens with currencies. And whilst it's, there are risks, of course, of currencies failing. And I'm not going to say that currencies don't fail. You've got to only look at Venezuela at the moment to see that there are situations by which horrible things can happen to countries. But ultimately, a return to the gold standard would not, I think, save that kind of situation. It would cause more implications for this modern world and modern society than it would solve. That is the kind of point I think I'm trying to make here. So where does that leave us in terms of gold? Personally, I view this subject as it can be very manipulative out there. There's an awful lot of videos that I hear and see on my playlist that I will have whilst I'm sitting there silver pouring or doing work generally that advocate the return to a gold standard and the fact that you should buy as much gold as possible because it's undervalued right now, or buy as much silver as you can right now, because in an event where the gold standard is returned, the ratio of gold to silver will change drastically and there'll be overnight profits of 10,000% or some ridiculous numbers like that. That's irresponsible in my opinion. I do not think that is the right thing to do. It's not the way the modern world works. And that's something that I think a lot of people forget. Gold and silver, yes, they've been currencies, they've been financial institutions for 5,000 plus years and more. But there's a reason for that. And at that time, the world was smaller, it acted in different ways than it does now. And the ability for populations out there to have that physical money in their pockets was very restricted back in those times. But now, the world works in different ways. We're all connected. We're all very, very well connected in this global village that we live in. And it's not, back in about 50 years ago even, it was not common for different people to be able to hold different currencies. Now it's just so easy. You can have borderless accounts with various different financial institutions out there. Personally, I've got a US dollar account. I've got a euro account. I've not got Bitcoin on financial cryptocurrencies, but the cryptocurrencies, that's another thing to factor in. There are just so many different currencies out there and means by which you can pay for things. And that is what has changed. It's not all about this yellow shiny stuff. Also, the last point that I'm going to touch on here is that the world doesn't really know about gold. It doesn't, the general population does not know about the true value of gold. And if there was a sudden shift to this yellow shiny stuff as that key cornerstone of any financial institution, people out there, I think, would find that incredibly hard to adjust to. They just don't understand the point of it. They don't understand what the value of gold truly is. And that is the key change in the way that the world works between now and 100 years ago. And that's why I think that the gold standard is a very unlikely scenario to return. And if it did, it would have significant financial implications for economies all around the world. So that's my collection of thoughts and opinions on the subject. I hope that my ramblings have been of interest to you. If they have and you've liked this video, please put a thumbs up on it. It really does help everything that we do here on our channel. If you've got some thoughts and opinions of your own, if you disagree with some of the things I've talked about here today, please let me know. It's why I make these videos. I find it fascinating to have those debates, to have those discussions down in the comment section. So please share it down below. As I said at the start of the video, I just ask that you comment respectfully. You know, we're here to have fun, thought-provoking discussions. We're not here to call each other names. That is just not the point of today's video. So let us know your thoughts down in the comment section. As I said, if you enjoyed the video, put a thumbs up on it. Otherwise, if you want to see videos like this in the future of fun, thought-provoking discussions, we do this every Wednesday. So make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you want to get a notification when these videos go live, hit the alarm bell. Otherwise, that is it for today. Thank you one and all for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week ahead. And as always, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.